what I wanted to do now is just share with you some of the work that's actually underway. What we're, both the Stewards of Change Institute and the Academy Health organizations are focused on as a result of the grant that the Kresge Foundation has provided to us. We're about a year into it, or almost a year into it now. And there's a number of things that are on, sort of on the docket that we're doing. When we wrote the grant and it got approved, we said that we'd be doing a number of different things. And those things are underway. And so what we want to do is make sure that you're aware of those so that you can actually utilize those resources as they become available and they become online. And then also, how do we take those forward, right? How do we begin to plan for expanding, accelerating, applying those resources as we move forward over the next year and hopefully beyond that, so we can actually leverage those and actually build out the collaboration. So one of the first things we did here was to actually sort of figure out how we're going to work together with our partner Academy Health, being a pretty different organization from Stewards in terms of the research focus and our focus on events and bringing people together and sort of consulting in and with organizations. So it's taken us a little while to sort of figure out the relationship, sort of develop a charter, develop operating procedures, much of the same kinds of things I think that we've been hearing over the last day and a half around how do you build collaborations, is figuring out the culture, figuring out who's and how decisions are being made, and those kinds of things. So that took a little bit of while to get that all up and running. And now we've got a pretty good team. You've met most of them here who are involved in the work, and so we feel like we're kind of getting up to speed. We're starting to produce some things that will be hopefully very valuable to the organization and to you as individuals. But we, in fact, do need to tune those up. So some of the things that I'm going to show you in just a minute are a new website that we built. One of the things is also an engagement portal in terms of trying to get your voices, create a space for how do we bring your voice into this and the voices of the various domains. And Dan, I appreciate the focus on those 6 domains, thinking about how do we actually integrate and bring those things together. And then some work we're doing on a training concept for this work. One of the things that over the years, and I'll show you just a couple of things here, as we talk about interoperability, as we talk about crossing silos and systems, it's complicated work, right? It's not the kind of thing that comes naturally necessarily. People spend a lot of time thinking about it. And to convey that to folks outside of this room, because many of the folks here are thinking about it all the time or very frequently, but to convey that outside of this room is complex. And because it's a 3-dimensional rubric cube in terms of really understanding all the different parts and pieces that are there. So we felt like, and we feel that having a way to share that and be able to actually create a training program would be really valuable. So I'm going to go through that pretty quickly. And then we're going to turn our attention to some of the actual partner activities. As part of the grant, as I said originally, we identified California, Connecticut, and Virginia as locations to start the work. Just 50 million people, and then we could figure out how to expand from there initially. But we had relationships there, we had work going on there, we had use cases, so that was all very, very a good starting point. Also, in addition to that, we have worked with the Healthcare Information Management Systems and Society for the last year and a half. In fact, as mentioned earlier, 2 years ago at our national conference, we actually had this conversation, the precursor to the NIC, with HIMSS there. To think about how do we blend those sectors? How do we think about being able to bring healthcare into this? And how do we leverage that for the purposes that we're talking about and hearing about before? So the partner activities, we're going to talk about a little bit about HIMSS. We're also going to look at our site in Connecticut, and Janice is going to talk a little bit about the Bridgeport Prosper site in terms of we've already heard a little bit about what that's going to look like, but how we can build on that and how we can leverage the other activities going on across the country. Richard's going to talk a little bit more about confidentiality and this idea of a national confidentiality and privacy toolkit. How do we blend and bring together the best thinking? We've already heard a number of things today. how do we expedite that so there's a playbook that can assist whether or not you're in healthcare or public health or human services or other public safety. How do we move that forward? And we've got some interesting ideas there. And then right after lunch, Margot Edmonds will present along with Beth the initial look-see at a interoperability guidance research that's going on. It's a kind of a meta-analysis of the interoperability research, which should hopefully give us a good view of what do we know, what are the gaps, and where do we go forward with that. So briefly, we are actually live now. This is just a screenshot, but the website for the National Interoperability Collaborative is up and running. And in that site, we have the opportunity for people to learn about NIC. We have an opportunity to join the site as a participant, as a member, as a partner. And then on the right side there is the connect and collaborate. And that's the idea of actually creating a place to go that you can sign in. It's a protected site where these conversations can happen online. In general, sort of ad hoc or very focused kinds of conversations that will happen. And people can begin to work and develop work groups around that. And then we're featuring some of the activities. The one that's featured here right now is the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust. And there's some other things that we can do, including the ITCC. So right now, the actual collaboration hub is not fully built out yet. If you go on, you can register for it, and it'll ask you for some information. But as we were developing it, we realized one of the things we really wanted to do was to hear from you and to get your opinion and your thoughts and actually engage with some user design thinking, what would actually work. Over the years, as we've observed and talked and worked with different organizations doing collaboration, we know it's hard work. And we know that a lot of them are built with the best intentions and they don't necessarily take off. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm hoping, and we've got good indications, as I showed you yesterday, in terms of the members and the participants who are involved, that there may be a critical mass. The question is, can we make it interesting enough? Can there be enough value to the people who are participating? And can it be sticky enough so that people want to participate and come back and touch it and be part of it? And one of the things we're hoping today, by the end of today, that people will actually sign up. Say, I want to be a curator. I want to be a facilitator in this. I want to actively engage and participate in some of my time that I have to be able to contribute to this community. And that's a tall order because everybody here has got a full plate already, I'm sure. And how do we carve out enough incentive to make people actually want to participate in this? One of the goals I'm hoping that we can begin to float this year has to do with actually creating, I'm going to use the word sort of a NIC Fellows program, where there's actually there's a place to be. There's a recognition that this is an important role for the people who are participating in it. So it becomes recognized as something that's relevant and important and contributing to the field. We're working on that, but I think that's one of the directions we're headed in. So these again are just working on some of the screenshots that we'll look at. So when you come into the collaboration portal, you'll have a profile. You can get into your discussions, what you've posted, and you can also see what's going on right now in the 6 domains here that we've articulated. And there's a dashboard summary. There'll be a place here to welcome to the discussion board. Again, these discussions can be sort of user-initiated. You want to find someone else who's interested in a particular topic or conversation, and those can be curated as we go forward, and they can be tracked. And we can invite people into those. You can post documents and those kinds of things. And this is just, I guess, another preliminary screenshot of what that might look like. Again, trying to dimensionalize the domains that people have interest in so that we can begin to do that right now. How many people are not yet? Okay, so there's a few people that are not. We had, I think, about 85 or so people that are on it. So that's in an interim, for an interim sort of communications place. We'll continue to feed and nurture that as a way to communicate with you, because I think it's really an efficient way, and it gets, many of you probably, even using that term, probably encountered crossed eyes and people like, what are you talking about? What is that word? Too many syllables in that word. And we encountered that a lot of, actually at the federal government when we were working at ACF. It was people said, let's change the name. It's too many, it's the wrong word. It was like, well, I don't think we're going to be able to change the name of it. But as we thought more about it and we've talked to folks, one of the things that occurred to us was that we've been in this work, and the more we've seen people struggling with it, it seems to represent what happens afterwards. Now, maybe we can come up with a better, shorter word or name for it, but it really does sort of encompass that idea of integrating and optimizing. How do we do that? And it's a complex thing to do. And so part of that has to do with creating a training program and a certification program, much the same way a project management professional. Everybody know what a PMP is? So if you work on technology, you generally have to have a PMP certification. So you know what somebody's got a certain level of credential, they have a certain level of understanding of the basic concepts. In this work, we don't really have that. I remember years ago, actually, Carrie, I think I was talking to Nick Matchione, who is the director in San Diego. I said, how would you replicate this somewhere else? And he said, people are the most important part of this work, and we would build it brick by brick, basically, person by person. And it really occurred to me at that moment that one of the things that was missing was this idea of how do you certify that somebody has a knowledge base, an understanding of the concepts that go into this complicated work that we're dealing with here. And so that really kind of was the precursor to this idea of creating a training program, potentially a certification program that would allow organizations, particularly government, to say, this person has, or this company has this kind of knowledge, and it's a certified understanding of the core concepts. And there's a lot of these concepts that are important to being able to do this work. And so ideally, we will be building out more and more of these modules. Under the Kresge grant, we're going to be building 3 of these modules over the next year. One of them actually has to do with just describing what interoperability is, and we're in the middle of doing that. The other one, the next one up, is actually confidentiality and privacy. How do we take that knowledge that we know today and make it more broadly available to the world? And then there's some conversation about the third one. So what I'd like to do is just show you briefly, this is a little less than a 2-minute video of what this curriculum actually talks about, and then just a couple more minutes and then we'll move into the presentations here.
Stewards of Change Institute is proud to introduce its groundbreaking Interoperability Training and Certification Program, or ITCC. Our vision, like yours, is to accelerate progress towards achieving health equity and better outcomes for communities across our country. The innovative ITCC program will offer training on demand through its state-of-the-art web-based platform and will enable your organization to prepare for the convergence of programs that span the HHS continuum, helping you build capacity to embrace the social determinants of health and wellness.
Thought leaders have long agreed that our national drive to optimize healthcare, while important, has been too narrow. Instead, the consensus among experts is that any truly effective healthcare system also needs to include other wellness-enhancing factors, such as access to quality education, employment opportunities, safe environments, and social supports. All of these elements fit under the umbrella term, social determinants of health and wellness.
ITCC uses knowledge and tools that were developed through our work over the past decade with thousands of HHS leaders, academic partners, and industry experts to prepare your workforce to achieve 21st century learning standards. This interactive curriculum is designed to teach you how to bridge program silos, expedite information sharing, and manage effective organizational change. At the heart of ITCC is Interoperability, a unique methodology that we created to build competencies that can meet the demands of an increasingly complex and interconnected field. Think of it as interoperability plus optimization equals interoptimability. Upon successful completion of the program, participants will receive accredited certification. See how ITCC can help accelerate your readiness for change. Go to stewardsofchange.org to experience the new Interoperability Training and Certification Program and make every worker your best worker.
Thank you. That's gratifying to hear that. It's been a labor of love so far, and there's a long road ahead, but we feel like that's an important contribution to actually moving this work forward. Uma yesterday talked about sort of the core theory of change. This is built on the work we've done, which is thinking about how systems change. And underneath this are some core concepts of how an organization will approach this work. It's either through a policy lens, a structure or an infrastructure lens, or a practice lens. Organizations are driven by innovation, or they're driven by outcomes, or some combination of those two, and you have a choice. I think there's a trade-off of that. And then change is either revolutionary or evolutionary. And embedded in all of this is the human capital, right? How does that actually move forward? And I think that's an important part of it. So we take this apart. Part of the reason for Stephen talking about this is actually start to create a vocabulary that we can work with. I think some of the work we've done in counties and states across the country is one of the things we've observed is that there's not a common vocabulary, how we talk about change, how we talk about these kinds of things. So embedded in this work is this, the sense of a vocabulary. Underneath it all as well is this sense of 10 change drivers. We had the good fortune when we first started doing this work to actually learn from Montgomery County, to learn from Allegheny County, learn from San Diego County, Mecklenburg, a number of other places, what they were doing. And in a way, we had a child welfare focus initially coming into it. We felt like archaeologists in a way. We were there, we were sort of uncovering what the leadership was doing. And what we saw was that effective organizations are still moving in this direction, pay attention to a whole variety of different change drivers. So whether or not it's the technology or the governance or the confidentiality or bridging silos or the customer or the consumer or data, performance management or funding, all of these are critical parts of any senior leadership job responsibilities is to know where that's at. So we built out assessment tools to understand how prepared an organization is to do that. So you actually get a gauge of, because many of us don't know all of them. So it gives you a sense, each one is about 4 or 5 pages. It goes over strategy, technology, key issues, what are the opportunities, and what are the challenges each field. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to line these up and say, okay, here's a way to understand, at least get an exposure to these, each of these 6 domains. And then as we go forward, we can understand where the overlaps and where the gaps are. So are there standards that cut across all 6 of these domains? I don't know the answer. I suspect there might be, or we can certainly explore that. Are there technologies, are there infrastructures that we can connect, kind of what Marianne was talking about earlier today? And so I just wanted to wrap that together to say there's a lot of work in process, from a training program to case studies to environmental scan work, and then a consumer engagement piece, which is all underway. So we're not starting from scratch. We've got some momentum. We've got some support from the foundation community, from the user community here. And what I want to convey is we want your participation. We want to make sure that we're building this in the direction of what's going to be most useful to you. So I got the high sign from Mike. I'm at my time here. So I'm going to turn this over to Richard to talk about the next.
I want the clock to start again. Because you didn't give the card to Daniel. I watched you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to go back to the previous panel for a moment to try to link us to them. It was a tremendous panel with wonderful expertise. But what I took from it was, here you have in the area of health, HHS, DOD, DOJ, all of these federal agencies saying for at least now more than 25 years, for treatment purposes, you need to share data about people. You need to make it portable, available. And we're still working at that. We're still, you really saw 3 pioneers who are still have their pick whatever it is that you used to use to dig for gold? Pickaxe. I didn't realize you were a gold miner. And shovels, and they're still mining for that data. And then you had my friend, Dr. Dewan, sitting in this chair, which is why I picked this chair. It was the lucky chair. And she is trying to share education data. Where's the Department of Education saying, I want you to share data? You know, I think Secretary DeVos is changing the name of the building so that no one can find it. Because that's not on their agenda. And then, you know, you see the UMAs and my friend Mark Cherna in Allegheny County and the folks in San Diego that are really, you know, pioneers. And they're trying to share not just health information, but public benefits and homelessness and child welfare and juvenile probation. And you don't have that imprimatur of all these federal agencies saying share, share, share. So I say that in total defense of my friends, the government lawyers, who have a very, very difficult job. They have to, you know, yesterday you saw me with the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust. And that's a hat I like to wear. So I'm going to remind everyone about the word trust. And we've got to build trust with the lawyers too, which means a lot of meetings. Claire's shaking her head because she just got the schedule for the next 3 months of the legal work group for the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust. We're going to be meeting a lot because every time we meet, we take one step forward. Sometimes we take 2 steps back. But the next meeting, we take 1 step forward and 1 step back. And the next meeting, we take 1 step forward and we stay there. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. But the trust is built with the people who come to the meetings. It's hard to build trust with the attorneys who aren't at the meetings because you have a person there who's the county representative. And I'll use the term she because in this example, it's all she's except me. You know, she has a colleague who specializes in HIPAA, so she's on the phone. And a colleague who specializes in education, and he's not there. So a lot of times it's really bringing along the lawyers to say the world is changing. And the world is changing faster than the laws are. I was saying to my good friend Simone this morning from San Francisco that a lot of the laws we're dealing with when dealing with health and human services were written well before computers. So you're still talking about documents and writings. And no one does that anymore. Everyone's on their computers, including during this discussion. God, Dan Chavez said, oh, he's looking right at me. San Diego. He just got that one for-profit hospital just bought, right? So we're about to, I'm sitting between 2 people, and we're going to be dealing with the health on one side, and then once Janice starts, the moon's the limit with Janice, as you may have heard. It's all about the babies and everything in between. So I just want you know, going back to the national, I forgot the name, the NIC. Cut that, okay? Let's start it again. The National Interoperability Interoperability Collaborative. Cut. So hopefully the confidentiality program or training isn't to train attorneys how to do documents. And is it going to convince an attorney that there should be uniformity and I always loved when I was a government attorney for 10 years. I represented the city of Philadelphia, you know, the place between New York and Washington. And the fight always was between our uniform contracts, and God forbid we wanted to enter into a contract with the state, and the state had its uniform contracts, or even worse, if we wanted to enter into a contract with a university. They're the worst, and we'll hear about them later today. And so it's really bringing a discipline law into the 21st century. The lawyers will be your best friends, I promise. I have to tell you, in our meetings in the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust, we have 3 lawyers who religiously come, one from each of the 3 counties. And each time we make progress. And there isn't an issue that hasn't been raised where we haven't been able to figure out between the 4 of us a solution. So I say, you know, hats off to the lawyers. Remember trust, bring them in early. Don't keep them at bay. I know a project that once you say, well, we're going to have to share this with our lawyers, they run away. And it's here in California that project is happening. And it will never get off the ground so long as you keep running away. So trust the lawyers. I want to bring up the famous Shakespeare about kill all the lawyers. The next line, it's sort of like the Second Amendment. Everyone has the right to bear arms.
The opportunity to participate in this fantastic collaborative. Pharmacy orders, and gone all the way up to being paperless in many places, and including all of the elements of documentation of visits to hospitals in all of their components. So thanks very much for your support. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Diane. Let me just ask if there's any quick questions here around the relationship, to understanding what we're trying to do with HIMSS here with the NIC. Maybe out there. So one of the things I think, Diane, thank you very much, is again trying to leverage and work with a giant organization that's got membership all over the country, got chapters all over the country. How do we accelerate our efforts by tying into other organizations that are already out there doing this work? Yep.
I'm just curious what the overlap of the technology vendors are that are in HIMSS and in sort of this broader community.
What do you mean the overlap?
So when I look at like SACWIS or some of these vendors that are delivering technology to state government, communities, et cetera, are those vendors members of HIMSS?
Absolutely. There's 650 or so vendors who are members. And, they collaborate on a lot of things. A lot of the standards that I was mentioning before, we wouldn't have those standards if they didn't come together, realizing that having those and sharing those is in their common good. At the same time, competition, as I mentioned before, it can be kind of tricky. And the built-in data blocking abilities, she said carefully, for the software and the hardware and everything in between, okay, is something that, again, I choose to say, well, at least there's a framework now and a policy that's not acceptable. It should never have been acceptable.
So last couple weeks ago, there was at the HIMSS conference, we had the pleasure of going in with 45,000 other people there, largest conference I've ever attended. Many of the same vendors that we see in the human services are there as well. So that's part of what the excitement is to say, are there pathways that we can cross and how can we leverage that? Because we're treating the same people in the same communities. So we can go forward with that. Oh, Mark, and then we'll move on.
So Martin Duggan, one of the board members of the Stewards of Change and a former one of those vendors. One of the challenges, though, is that within those companies, they separate out their health division and their human services division. So one of the things I think that we can do is help them come together across their own divides, their own silos within their own organizations, to actually learn from some of the excellent work that's been done on the standards in the healthcare area that we haven't really evolved to the same degree in the human services type area. And I think that's a great opportunity for this type of work and collaboration to do.
Definitely capture that. Yep, go ahead.
In the U.S., the 21st Century Cures Act, there's this idea of this U.S. core data set.
Right.
And that in that core data set, a lot of the health and human services and social determinants data elements are not there. They're not on the list.
Yeah.
Okay, and so I think there's and it's buried down in the weeds, but at the end of the day, those interoperability standards are what the RCE is going to advocate for. And so if you want to cross the sort of traditional health and social determinants boundary, a dialogue has to get introduced that says, hey, let's look at these data elements because they're very EHR-centric.
Right.
And I don't see where that dialogue is happening anywhere in this sort of context of 21st century cures.
Well, I mean, it is definitely going on, but people are treading carefully. I mean, a lot of people everybody has not left the Office of the National Coordinator, for example. There's still people there who every day are working to get this right. And I guess my personal recommendation before was not to lose track of that fact and for us to keep trying to exchange information the way we know works. And then some of that in terms of how much energy that we all have to give to what we think is most important, what our priorities are, to just take a look at that. I mean, I think that it's still, the age-old question, how to eat an elephant. People know? Yeah.
So I think that's a good stopping point for now. I think what I want to do is bring this back into the conversation when we think about specific action steps. And I thank you, Tim, for that, because I think if it's a critical moment where we need to be into that conversation, we need to make sure that's in there. So in the spirit of eating elephants, or lunch for that matter, let me move the dialogue along here.
Okay.
And ask Janice to come
Thank
forward
you.
and talk to us about our kids.
I'm a developmental psychologist, and I want to talk to you a little bit about an initiative that could use a lot of your help, where data is a challenge, but it's not the only challenge that we have. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce you to my partner in not crime here. Alison, would you stand up? This is Alison Logan. She's an opera singer and an art instructor and the leader of Bridgeport Prospers, amazing woman who has always had a voice but really found it in this context. And is Kathy Brennan still here from DSS? All right. So Kathy works for one of my entirely favorite DSS directors in the world, Rod Brambry, who's moving our Medicaid system to be supportive of this kind of work, so from the back end to the front end. And I would have introduced Neil Halfon, although you probably know him, except he snuck out. So when he comes back, tell him if he'd have been here. Where is he? All right, great. So another one of my heroes in this work. That's really important. Now, I'm going to ask you to do two things before we begin, on account of I've been watching you. That's what comes from being a mother. If you have a phone and it's on, please turn it off. Come on, it's a request. If you have a phone and you're not on call, can you turn it off? Well, this is an unobedient group. When I talk around the country and I ask people to do that, I do it for a purpose, not because, in fact, it's a polite thing to do, but because there's a lot of cortisol and stress in your body when a speaker up here asks you to do something like that. That's important because we anchor this work in the neuroscience of brain development, and that cortisol flow, the biology of in our bodies for children, is incredibly important. And it's the closest I can bring you to trauma without introducing you to trauma. So that's the first one. The second one is to ask you a question. How many of you have seen the documentary Resilience? Okay, that's a bad sign. Resilience is a documentary that has been in circulation for about 3 years, 2016. Please Google it, so don't turn your phone off. I'm going to talk with you just for a minute about the neuroscience basis for the work we're doing and plead with you to go home and look at that video or the pieces of it. It talks to us about trauma and ACEs. It talks to us about the importance of the first 3 years of our life, and it sets the frame for everything you are absolutely doing every day. Usually when I speak, half the people have seen it. I think 3 or 4 names went up. So please, if I haven't totally offended you, take a look at that or figure out who in your community is looking at it. And it's a life changer. It's a life changer in this work. So those are the two things. And if I was really going to be gnarly, I'd ask you to count 1, 2, 1, 2, and I'd ask everyone to stand up, every one of the ones. And the reason is because that is the proportion of young children in America who are living under the age of 5, who are living in low income or poverty circumstances. And when you look around the room and you realize it's every one of you, 1, 2, 1, 2, you understand the other reason why we have to be in this space. Now, I'll do the conversation really quickly. So we were asked and were pleased to join you by Commissioner Bremby to be the Connecticut site for the work that goes on in partnership with NIC. And that's kind of what we want to talk about here. Oh, sorry. So I often ask people what's in their backpack, because what you carry from this it influences how you develop and how you raise your children and how you raise your grandchildren. So the neuroscience is incredibly important for us. The second one is that we think this work has to be embedded in families. Several of you have talked about it. You can't just talk about kids. You can't just talk about a senior or a granny or anybody else. It's an intergenerational, multi-generational challenge. And that involves us this way as well as this way. We've laid out what we think those pieces are. They're not just kid pieces, and the harder ones are the adult pieces. We started with a values-based approach to this work. We said, what do we want our practice to be, and what are the data implications of that? Well, I'm sorry. Could you click for me? I'm not ambi-mental. Okay, so one more click. Thank you. I'll tell you when to click. Usually Alison does this for me. Oh, good. That's good. It's done.
Oh, we have 15 hours.
Right. All right, I'm set. If we're going to go to the moon, Richard, we might as well have enough time to do it, right? You have to do people. You always have to do place. You always have to do politics. Politics really matters. Policy, practice, program, and partnerships. And we use that to check off whether we're actually doing this work in a way that maximizes the likelihood of success. So that's our framework in a minute and a half. Could you click for me? This is Bridgeport, Connecticut. It is The largest Connecticut city, it has 99.9, if you can conceive of that, % of its children on free and reduced price lunch. It does not have an economic base in the richest 1 or 2 counties of America. This is where we're trying to do this work. Could you click for me, please? So we had a little bit of data to start with. We are a Strive collective impact, I am going to say that, regardless of what the Stanford Review says, a life course approach to this kind of work at the community level. So these are the data points we used, and that pushed us to the point I want to make today, that the babies really matter in this process. The first I've already told you, 99% of the kids are living in low income. The second is that fewer than 1 in 10 8th graders are proficient in math. It's actually 5%. I want to know where the workforce is going to be, but that's a real data point. The next one down is 30% of 3rd graders reading at level. We really care about that now in America. We've decided reading's probably really important. At entry to school, only 30% are ready, and this is the kicker for us. 75% of the kids who stand at the Head Start door in Bridgeport are developmentally behind, and I can answer the question about what that means because we've already gone to that issue. When you have that kind of a back mapping of data, then first of all, you have everyone's attention, right? You didn't even have to turn off your phones because you're in this space now with me. And that's where we had to start. And then we went and figured out how many babies this is in our 2 hospitals, 1,600, 2,000. Enough that if we don't pay attention, it's going to be really bad, but a small enough number that we could conceivably change the lives of these children. So that's a really good example of, okay, we have the data, what are we going to do with it? Well, that's a place to start. Could you click for me? So the people in this city who are hope-less, they don't believe that it can be different. Our job is to get them to a point, all of us, hopeful, so that that sort of trauma array to resilience is incredibly important. They got really brave a couple months ago and they set a goal for themselves. I'm so proud of them. We pushed them, but in fact they said, here's the goal. It's pretty audacious. All Bridgeport babies born beginning in January 2018. Do I need data? Oh my God, there's already a couple hundred babies out there and I don't even know where they live yet, but you do. You do. So we need to partner on the health side with the hospitals to know where those babies are and what are the conditions of the lives that they're living, because the neuroscience says pay attention to your first 3 years so that they, nope, you cheated. So beginning in January of this year, all these, well, I'd be happy with 75%. I am not 100%, or you can never get there. So if we could just flip those numbers, where 75% were really not ready, and now they are at the age of 3, that's where we want to go. That gives us a 3-year focus, a universal focus, a population focus, and a cohort. And then the honesty is, where are we when they're 3? Or where are we, even better, when we do developmental screening and they're 1, and they're 2, and they're 3? So this has the very best of program designs if we can figure out how to continue to move it forward. So that's our big, hairy, audacious goal. And there's a kid behind every one of those numbers, which motivates me 24 hours a day. Could you click now, please? So we created what we call the Bridgeport Baby Bundle. Several of you talked about, should we be bundling? Yes. If we're thinking about pay for success, should we be bundling? Why? Because no single initiative or evidence-based practice or program is going to change the lives of these children because it's complicated, right? If we work on several fronts, we can move it. That's why that big framework is where we started. The baby bundle, you can talk about with the CEO of the local bank going up in the elevator for 45 seconds. If that's what you have, you can say baby bundle and people are listening. This is our baby bundle. It has 5 strategies. They are care and supported care and parenting. So we start with families because that's in fact where babies live. We're looking at the civic piece of this. We need an army of helper and advocates. You've talked about needing to use this data to move public discourse and public conversation. I mean, we hope we have 100. We hope we have 1,000. We hope we have 2,000, one for every baby, with T-shirts walking down the street next March saying, you know, we're the baby brigade in Bridgeport. We have an actual investment bundle. We know the couple of programs we want to bring in that are evidence-based and how much it will cost to get them here. I am so proud of us. Usually that's the piece you worry about last. We're looking how to innovate and make better natural connections in our communities. So where's our faith community? Where is our police force? Who's actually working with grandparents who are taking care of 40% of these? That's a data issue too, at the very basic demographic level, and we're beginning to asset map to find that. And then the last is, of course, track change and measure impact, truth to power. Now let me just take 1 minute and, 3 minutes? It's broken, right? When I was in government, I used to take the microphone and figure that made me the queen. So I'm going to just show you what's underneath here, and then I'll stop, and we can take questions. So that's the truth to power part. Now you can click, and we're going to click under each one, Daniel. Okay? So each one of these strategies has a bunch of stuff, and the stuff under there that's in bold, we're actually moving. And our goal was to have movement in each one of those strategies because people had to believe that they could move from hopeless to hopeful, and there would be evidence of successes, early successes. We are impatient. I know one step at a time, but I also know babies are growing every day that we're not providing an opportunity for them to do that richly. So we are going to bring in some evidence-based programs like Family Connects, universal home visiting. We're working in the early care and education sector, unlicensed and licensed family homes, because that's where babies are when they're 1 to 3 and they're not actually being cared for by their parents. We're in early literacy, and we're looking at maternal mental health all together. So we need that to come in as a bundle, because none of those by itself is going to make the difference we need. Oh, you cheated. I know. So the second is the resilience screening. That's, if you see that, you'll know why we're using that to promote the neuroscience conversation and conversations that we have not been able to have about poverty and race and gender and politics. And the most amazing conversations are going on in this city, and we can't get there without those. We can't. So we're using those connections to move an army of helpers and advocates, because we can't get there just on the provider side. That doesn't work anymore. We have an investment bundle. Those are the items in it. We're looking at universal developmental screening and what it will take to do that. We need some help. We're looking at expanding a variety of other evidence-informed practices, because everything that we want to change can't have been random controlled trial. I mean, it can't be. That's just not reasonable at the most basic level of the work we do. Innovation for us is neighbor to neighbor. It means picking a couple of our 8 neighborhoods and going deep. Not me, because I don't look like the neighborhood. But being in the neighborhood with people who are in the neighborhood to figure out what their answer would be to the simple question of, what do you need? Not what's wrong with you, not how many social service agencies are you engaged in, what do you need? So it's a very fundamental shift in our practice and how we think about what we need to know and what our data systems need to tell us. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter that they're in 7 agencies. We'll get to that. But it starts in a different place. And then the last one, we put us all first now, because we desperately need your help to figure out how to figure out the 3 or 4, one's not enough for me, pieces of the data work that we can learn from you as fast as absolutely possible, so that we can document in a world where some people in our schools in Bridgeport still have yellow paper and pencils on them in their portfolios that never go any place beyond that. That's crazy making. I mean, it's crazy making. So this initiative for us has given us a chance to be in the 21st century world. And then we're also we'll be working with Commissioner Bremby as part of this, and looking at how Medicaid can fit into this process, and how existing systems like 211 Help Me Grow can actually serve as that connective tissue. Could you click for me? Okay, so where can data help us? Population health, mental health, cohort-based healthcare. I hope you see yourself here. Early education, K-12 education, parental, post-secondary, because we are family-based, and what happens to babies is a function of what their parents have experienced. Family economics, oh my gosh. So remember, 1 out of every 2 of you, family economics is a real issue, just like economic development. Community supports, faith and policing are two really good examples. This is good, Daniel. You and I are in a rhythm now. All right, good. Next one. Child and family screening and assessment. How many of you know what an ACEs score is? All right. So then when you see resilience, it'll be very powerful for you. They argue that we should be universally doing ACEs screening, or at least making it available, because it helps us to know where families' experiences have been and what we might predict if we could do any kind of predictive modeling, where we're going to need to have extra support. And child and family systems and outcomes. Then last, for me, evidence-based stuff. It's really important. I just know that there aren't going to be random control answers for everything that we need to know. So where can connected data help us? Ta-da! Man, we want to be connected with you. We've already met a bunch of you. You can teach us. We're good learners. We're in a city that needs your help. And every one of those babies now we own. Every one of them, each year for the next 3 years. And if we can do that, Uma, think what we can do. We won't even need some of the stuff that we're now providing. In fact, we won't. We'll be able to actually reform some of our systems if we can send children forward during those critical years of brain development so that they will not need the systems we are so busy building and maintaining. And I ran a bunch of them, so thank you.